Next week, the Treasury Minister will deliver this government's fourth budget, and on Perspective we assess the current shape of government finances and consider what might be announced in the budget in Tynwald on Tuesday. I'm joined in the studio by former MHK Chris Robertshaw, Andy Saunders from the hospitality sector, and political commentator Alistair Ramsey. Chris, you were suggesting that perhaps the Treasury Minister is dropping some pretty broad hints as to what we might expect.
I think he has. I think I'm more than a little surprised about the degree to which he's entered into a narrative with the public prior to the budget. I haven't seen that happen to quite the same extent in the past. That to me suggests a degree of nervousness, trying to, as it were, settle the discussion in the public mind. He's been saying things like, don't worry, the reserves are fine, and don't worry, the pensions are okay, and NI funding, the NI account's fine. And you think to yourself, oh goodness me, why is he saying all these things? In my mind, it creates questions rather than answers anything, and it suggests that there is reason to be concerned. If you step right back from this, you and I will very well remember the struggles we had to face up to the fact that we lost £200 million on VAT, and in our time we actually captured back 125 million of it and passed on 75 million, as it were, to the next house to deal with. Phil, we're still on, we're overshooting our budget every year, I think between 75 and 100 million pound a year. I think our government and our Tynwald have become debt junkies. It's become normal to have this extraordinary overspend. Well, let me be absolutely blunt here. If this goes on much longer, it's going to send the government, the Isle of Man, into a very, very difficult situation, and it's got to be brought to heel. I absolutely believe that the next election should all be about a government that we can afford to pay for, that keeps our insurance and our tax situation attractive. And right now, it's in huge danger. I can't be more worried about the future, quite honestly, Phil.
And perhaps some of the reason that we are hearing so much in advance of the budget is because members are asking these questions. They are querying various issues, various points with the Treasury Minister. Therefore, he is being transparent and giving answers to the questions.
Well, there has been. I mean, I listened in yesterday to the debate over the triple lock pension issue. My major concern, frankly, are the younger people. I don't think many people understand this, and so if you'll allow me to explain it, I'd be most grateful. We're listening to the tumult, the turmoil in the UK because Rachel Reeves has increased NI for employers up from 12-something to 15%, and it's caused significant damage to the well-being of businesses. Now, but however, what you haven't heard is quietly over recent years, the employees' NI contribution has dropped from either 11 and 12% down to 8%. So the NI contribution that employers and employees make in the UK will be 23.5% together. In the Isle of Man, the employee is paying 11%, and the employer is paying 12.8%. So actually, our national insurance costs are higher in the Isle of Man than in the UK, and in the UK they're causing real problems. But a point I really want to make here is that the threshold point that you start paying 11% as an employee on the Isle of Man is much lower than in the UK. In the UK, you don't start paying as an employee national insurance at 8% until you've earned £242. As things stand in the Isle of Man, employees are paying 11% as soon as they reach, what's the figure now, £160. So you start paying higher insurance £100 earlier. The result of that and I'm surprised that MHKs aren't picking this up. The result of that is that our younger people on lower incomes, right the way through up to low middle incomes, are now paying the same tax as the UK, because if you put NI and tax together, their burden is the same as the UK. The result of that is, because the cost of living on the Isle of Man is higher, it means that the circumstances of our low and lower earners and lower middle earners is significantly worse than the UK. They're in a trap. What's the government doing about it? Absolutely nothing. I mean, there's lots I could say, Phil, but I better shut up.
We will get onto you again, but Andy Saunders...
No, what Chris has said is 100% right, and that's the policies that the LVA and so on have been pushing for the last couple of years, and the view on the minimum wage discussions that have been happening over the last few weeks. Minimum wage, everybody's in support of getting more money into the pockets of lower earners. Yeah. Everybody wants for that. And most employers are very happy to support that. But what they don't want to see is all of that money being taken really in a stealthy tax grab by our Treasury. And that's where we've said all along.
Last year,
it wasn't even stealthy, was it?
Well, we
took an extra 10%.
It was very obvious that 2% extra, but a 10% increase effectively on the higher rate of income tax. And I know at the time there was quite a lot of concern.
Mm-hmm. And everybody in a full-time job will pay that higher rate on some portion of their earnings. And that's just not acceptable, really, is it? There's no evidence that government is trying to help poverty.
In terms of the hospitality sector, because obviously that's a very important element of particularly the local economy. Mm-hmm. Has anything improved over the course of it?
No, the hospitality sector continues to suffer and has more and more pressures put on it at the moment. We're in no better position at all. In fact, we're in a worse position now than we were 12 months ago.
There was that hospitality sector group established by the Enterprise Department.
There's been difficulties. There's been difficulties, Phil, and there's time yet. We have to give that time to reform itself and set up how it wants to work. So I'm not negative about the hospitality board at the moment. I'd like to give it time to see what happens in that particular section, but it hasn't taken off yet as such. It's taken a long time to get going. Hopefully that will start to produce some better outcomes for the sector as a whole. But we've been given these policies that are going to come from the hospitality board. When we did the LVA called a public meeting back in May last year, and the policies we set out at that stage are things to help drive our local economy was to increase the personal tax allowance on the lower earners, to reduce the NI payments, to increase the thresholds on NI, to make sure that anybody earning under living wage amount shouldn't be going outside of the 10% tax band. Now everybody has to pay tax and give some input to the community, but to suggest that lower earners have to do the vast majority of the carrying of the burden isn't right. And that's where we feel it's at the minute.
And I guess the hospitality board, if it was to be effective, would have been lobbying hard against what was announced and then has been reversed, which was the double increase in the minimum wage to reach the living wage. And as I think you've alluded in your earlier comments, living wage is a great aspiration, but perhaps not something to be delivered by a sector that's already struggling.
Well, living wage is an aspiration, but it's where does that living wage come from? And can we take any wage, the minimum wage, in just singularity and say that the whole solution to our whole poverty situation is to just keep putting the wage up? We've got to look at a far wider range of people before we can, range of problems and address those before we can just say, well, if we keep pumping a minimum wage up, then everybody's going to come out of poverty. It's not worked so far. We've had minimum wage for 2 decades nearly. Yeah.
Alistair, you've been sitting quietly in the corner there. Are you convinced by the arguments you've heard so far? Are you more charitable to government, or do you think it's
probably not more charitable? I mean, I think the issues have been set out very clearly there, and what surprises me is that you don't hear these points being made very clearly or loudly in the House of Keys for whatever reason. The thing that intrigues me about the Treasury in particular is the apparent lack of political nous in that department. They scored a fairly major own goal last year with the income tax rise, and then with the handling of the triple lock. I mean, they appear to have bungled it. They've almost lost their entire budget over that. They've now had to have a separate motion about that next week. Whether that means that the budget, the pink book that's already been printed, is actually invalid, because that may be based on the changes that they're proposing.
And again, as I understand it, the separate motion could be the benefits uprating order, which is what happens anyway at budget time. So it may not be as separate as some members thought when they were.
I really can't see this change happening anytime soon now. The next election is next year, and to propose a change that appears to disadvantage something like 6,000 pensioners without a proper consultation, without the national conversation that was proposed, and without even getting the members properly on board, is pretty reckless.
And to be fair on government and Treasury, they have begun that national conversation. They did have a fairly significant consultation exercise. The Minister came on the programme and it described the changes that were being suggested. The solution, to be fair, hadn't been identified at that stage. Various options were given. But I guess what Tynwald is saying, what many Tynwald members are saying, is they haven't had the debate, and it undoubtedly would be a lively debate, to agree which of the options that had been suggested was the right one.
Yeah, they haven't had a debate to approve in principle, and to try and do that now, so close to the next election, I think is quite ambitious, to put it mildly.
Certainly Laurie Hooper, who has formerly, up until fairly recently, been a part of the Council of Ministers, was quite forceful in his comments about the national conversation on this.
As was Kate Lord Brennan.
Yeah, and both formally inside the Council of Ministers. So it does, I don't know, it seems a bit strange. I mean, Chris, these things happen in Council of Ministers. There are probably, I found anyway, more disagreement in Council of Ministers
I don't think
in the past, perhaps, that there's been strong debate, I think is the word I'm looking for, internally, which the public don't tend to get to see. Do you think that's been happening? And perhaps the two departing ministers had thought that something was going to be done in one particular way, and then it's been done in another way?
I think the problem is deeper than that. I'm so concerned now, Phil. I'd say to you that if I was a backbencher now, still in Keys, coming up to the budget, I'd actually, for the first time in my life, say I would vote against the budget, because I think we need a complete reset. We need a shock to the system, because the members, listening to that debate yesterday, they may very well be focused on a particular pension issue, but I hear none of them saying, look, we're in serious trouble here. We are continually overspending year after year after year. We're running the reserves down, despite what the Treasury Minister has tried to indicate in the public. Right now, we're not being fair with our lower paid people. And I'm saying that number's going right the way up into lower middle earners now. At the same time, according to what he said in public prior to the budget, is that he's going to lean in now and use the NI reserves further for paying for the National Health Service. It effectively means that we're selling our NI fund down the Swanee. Where does that, the young people now that we're overcharging NI on, where's their pension in 20, 25 years' time or whenever it is? And of course, we are running into very serious trouble now. And Tynwald is kicking the can down the road, and there's no proper, never mind just the pension, there's no proper engagement between Treasury and the members. They need to be sat down and they need to have it explained what serious issues we're in here, in private if necessary, so they understand what the challenges are. We have a bloated government. It goes on year after year after year, and nobody's doing anything about it. And it needs to be sorted, and it can be sorted. But right now, this current administration, this Treasury, is selling the Isle of Man down the Swanee, and it's got to stop. It's got to stop, and members need to understand the serious nature of why are none of them talking about the way we're treating our lower paid people? They are talking about wanting to see the minimum wage move to the living wage, at the same time as significantly charging those very same people very high levels of national insurance, significantly higher than the UK. I brought this to Treasury's attention in 2015, and quietly they've tried to sneak up little by little, but it's nothing like enough, and it's leaving our low-paid people exposed in a totally unacceptable way. And Treasury need to explain to the members what are they going to do in the future when the NI fund runs out. How are they going to pay? Not us, because we'll be dead and gone. But
I think, to be fair on the Treasury Minister and indeed Treasury members, this is the whole point of this national conversation that they tried to start. I'm not sure how effective that national conversation has been, in as much as Tynwald members certainly are saying, well, OK, it would have been great if we'd have had this. But there has certainly been a consultation, and the consultation is primarily about trying to ensure that future generations will get a reasonable pension. That's why they are looking at things like the triple lock.
Well, here's the conflict, Phil. On the one hand, you're saying, yes, they want that conversation. On the other hand, as I've said, in his narrative in public prior to the budget, he's been trying to smooth nerves down on the NI fund, on pensions, on the reserves. He should be, if he really wants a conversation, if he's going to be honest about this, he needs to be a damn sight more frank with the public of the Isle of Man than he is been doing, because God only knows what the opinion of people in 20 years will be when things have gone seriously wrong, of what's happening now. And they'll look back and say, how dare they have conducted themselves in that fashion and sold what is a brilliant place down the Swanee because they want to carry on with a bloated organisation that needs sorting out.
Andy, one of the responses that I guess the Treasury Minister would give if he were on this programme is in relation to the COVID response. That taxed the government in the sense of taxing their minds quite significantly, and they did come up with some pretty good schemes to try and help businesses survive during that time. Certainly, it was a very costly exercise for government. Is that fair, would you say?
I'd argue that. I would say it was very fair. What the schemes that came up to support our people were very strong and very well done. Not so well for businesses. A lot of businesses are still, and this is one of the issues that comes from that. And I don't like going back to COVID now. We're long past COVID, and economy should work quicker than that. But there is a lot of residual debt remaining in most of small and medium enterprises from that period, because the support didn't really get to businesses. The salary support scheme was excellent, but in terms of small businesses actually getting input into their own accounts, there wasn't much money that went that way. salary support went to the employees, and the businesses continued to pay national insurance on those payments and so on. So it actually ended up salary support as a debt to the vast majority of small business.
I must interject one point here, Phil, please, if you don't mind. What we've seen since 2008, we've seen two major black swan events. We've seen the financial crash 2008, which hit the Isle of Man very, very hard. Then we saw COVID again hitting very hard. Point is, Phil, black swan events keep happening. So if the government carry on the way they're doing now, and that's spending our reserves as if it doesn't matter, the next black swan could bring us down completely. And right now, what we're seeing internationally is the end of the post-war settlement. You're seeing disturbance and difficulties. America, Europe, everywhere. UK, debt building up, the BRIC movement starting to affect. There's all sorts of turbulence now in the system. And the only way the Isle of Man can properly protect itself is to make sure that it runs a government that's living within its means. And we're not doing that. And that's the fundamental issue. You sort that out, and you can sort everything else out. And they're not doing it, and they're not discussing it, and it's a deep worry.
Alistair, Chris makes it all sound so simple in terms of reducing the size of government. There's many people tried in the past and not been too successful.
What interests me is that, it is a fundamental issue. It's a fundamental kind of divide in politics, I guess, how you view the size and role of government and taxation and so on. And then we've got the context of competitiveness around the jurisdiction. This, as I think Chris said, this ought to be the centrepiece of the next general election. Sure. But I'm kind of doubtful about that, because our elections don't tend to be about policies. You know, a lot of the people who've gone along with this government will probably get back in, even though a lot of people out there are saying, look, there's something fundamentally up here. A lot of, not just business people, I mean, a lot of people, more than normal. But people always say it's the worst government ever. It's a Manx thing. But more people are saying that now, I think. And I wonder, how do we make our elections about policy and strategy, the fundamentals, without allowing people just to say, well, look, you know, I got your granny her new house.
Another big question.
Phil. I've got the answer, and I've been going on about this.
I didn't doubt you would.
For years.
Do tell.
The concept of smaller, smarter government built around what's now called a unified system would allow us to keep all our departments, but to simplify them and make sure that they were utterly occupied by service delivery. At the moment, our departments are clumsy conglomerates, and they represent themselves that way. And every effort, we've seen it and watched it, every effort to try to rein this in fails. 1 minute, let's reduce the headcount, or let's limit the budget. You can't do it that way. You have to drive deeper into all of this. You have to separate, back to Alistair's point, you have to separate strategic and high-level policy issues away from and out of the individual departments. And once you've got that, you then have a discussion at two levels. One, with the quality of the service delivery, and the other about strategic policy direction that can extend beyond even one house. And there are ways to do this. And we need to think about all of this, and we need to answer the question that Alice just come up with about how you engage the public in these issues. And of recent date, I've been saying we need to start thinking about the Swiss system of referenda on the big key issues, so that people become engaged outside of this one-off every 5-year election for an individual, and be much more engaged in where's the Isle of Man going, and why is it going in this direction? Is that what we want? And that way we re-engage the public in a much more informed and proper way than currently, where we just have to select individuals and sort of hope for the best. What we're ending up with is a bit of a follow-on of the UK system, as more civil servants have that UK mindset, which in the UK is it's separate. The governmental system has separated itself off from the people of the electorate, which is why you've got this tumult now in the electoral system in the UK. We have to keep our system but refine it so that we get proper engagement and we allow the public to be involved in the big decision-making process. I better shut up because I could go on for half an hour here.
but I do think that's a critical issue.
And you're right in what you're saying, and that's why the situation is. We used to be a proactive jurisdiction. Where we went out and found, when all the 20 years ago, we went out and found sectors we could work with, and we became very productive with those sectors by saying, yes, we can make these things happen, but we will also offer good jurisdiction and good policies that will protect the public from these. Now our government is just so top heavy and so jugged up that we can't go out and find those businesses that need to come to the Isle of Man, because there's too much infighting or too much looking inwards on each other from our civil service really to where we are. We've changed dramatically in the last 15 years, and it has to be changed. Our tax receipts are going up, our VAT receipts are going up, but that's been eaten by our government. All of that extra money is going straight in to pay for the running of our government rather than going to where it needs to be.
Alistair, I mean, you've been on the inside in the same way that Chris and I have to a fashion. Is government capable of reforming itself? Is it almost designed to stop that change happening?
I think it's very hard for government itself to reform itself because it has no strong mandate, no strong incentive to do so. And that's why you need a strong and clear public mandate for the politicians, so that they know if they don't achieve that change, they will lose their jobs as politicians. Under our system, the public can say one thing, the members agree, they don't deliver, and they get back in because they get back in as individuals who have looked after their constituents.
And there's almost an excuse that seems acceptable, and I certainly never saw it as acceptable. That, oh, well, I'm only one of 24, what can I do on my own?
It's the classic, yes.
But that's not the case, is it? As an individual, you can achieve a lot in Keys. I'm looking at Chris Robertshaw there.
Well, yes. I mean, I put a lot of effort into the policy review committees and started up the Constitutional, Legal and Justice Committee. But there is another side to this as well, and that is that there's a sort of a complacency in the system within the departments that if something goes wrong, well, don't worry, the minister's going to carry the can, he'll get sacked, everybody will be happy and think that the issue's resolved. No, it's not. You've just changed the head of that organisation. It just carries on remorselessly. The one thing that has the chance of really changing this is that people standing in the next house say, we have got to find ways of starting to live within our means. And it's not happening. As I've said, we're in danger here. If the 5-year forecast that comes out in the budget, if that says that we're still running, shall we say, around about £75 million overshoot every year, right the way through to 28-29, way beyond the next election, then that means we have been running a deficit for 20 years. Well, shame on us. And everybody, it's no good us worrying about individual issues, as it were, within the system. For example, the current concern about pensions. When I was listening to that debate, I felt, metaphorically speaking, if you like, I was seeing the House, as it were, pushed into a corner, trying to fight over an issue related to pensions, when the big issue, the elephant in the room, is we're running out of money, people, and that's just simply part of the problem. They've got to address the main issue. If we start living within our means, then we can run future pensions the way we want to, that's fair to everybody. And as I come back to my first point in this discussion today. We are not treating our young people and our lower income people anything close at the moment to fairness, and it's got to stop.
Alistair, I mean, it is part of the problem that members are very good at debating things that they understand, and that those things, I'm not being disparaging here to members, but they tend to be obvious things like planning. Yeah. They've got a fair understanding about how planning might work, or how roads maintenance or something like that, footpaths, whatever it may be. The big sort of ticket issues like how to manage an economy, how to grow an economy, these are much more complex and difficult issues to understand and perhaps to debate. And perhaps that's why we tend to be focused on single issue elements rather than that bigger picture.
I guess the kind of particular issues are things that the public can relate to more easily, but the politician's responsibility is to look at those bigger issues and to make them relevant to people by explaining. And I think there is a culture in Manx politics of kind of leaving the big stuff to, the ministers or the departments. It's not really for us to challenge. And there's a culture of going along with by and large, and it's got more so in the last few years, going along with what the government come up with. For me, the system of the closed briefings is part of that problem. That kind of, we're all in a bubble together, and we've been told, but it's been explained to us. So that's
And of course, it's been explained by the government team. And I'm not being disparaging about the government team, because I know they all work exceptionally hard, and they try and do the best job that they can do. But there is a government team, the parliamentary team, the scrutiny side of that, of any argument, is much less well staffed than the government side.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of challenge and scrutiny is becoming more robust now, because we're getting near an election, and also because a particular Laurie Hooper has been released onto the backbenches, and he is quite a formidable challenger of his former colleagues. So that's quite heartening to see, actually.
Scrutiny has a role, but it's not the answer to how you form high-level strategy and policy. And taking up Alistair's point, the problem is that we are expecting the departments, the operating departments, right the way across the board, to come up with high-level strategic thinking. That shouldn't be their role. And when things go wrong, they get blamed. I come back to this concept of splitting up operational delivery from high-level strategic thinking. And that high-level strategic thinking should involve, it's a horrible phrase, but quality think tanks that advise government as a whole as to where things... We've got some brilliant people on the Isle of Man, some really first-class people. We just ignore them. We should be bringing them in and getting them to help us form the right high-level policy. That high-level policy then should be discussed in public and, if necessary, voted on in referenda, and living beyond the issue of one election to the next. That's the only way we're going to get to the point where we start forming good quality future thinking that's going to protect future generations. Right now, we're not in a good place.
One of the things that Laurie Hooper has been very clear about is that, in his view, the answer to healthcare is pump more money in. We can introduce things like inheritance tax. We can tax or alter the national insurance rules so that pensioners if they're earning enough, will continue to pay national insurance. These are the comments that Laurie Hooper is very keen to put out there, and they're the policies of his party, and he was elected on those policies, so it's understandable that he will say that. But I guess that Chris, you've got a different view.
Yes and no. First of all, no, because I think we have to look at what's going wrong with regard to our health service at the moment, and this might be very uncomfortable for some people, but I do actually support the concept of Manx care. Where we went wrong was we carried on following through the national health insurance, the NHS system in the UK, where I can only describe it as something of a lobotomy. And I'm focused here on the main spender, which is the hospital. We've got a lobotomy of the medics, the clinicians, the nurses on one side, and the bean counters on the other. Now, the big failing in the UK on NHS was the top lead clinicians and nurses were never developed and trained as future finance managers as well, so that they had in their hands both an understanding of how this could run cost effectively and how to make sure that the patient was cared for. What we did was we did the right thing, was adopt Manx care, but then actually at one stage we did go out and get a really good leader in Rosalind Ranson, and what did we do? We kicked her into touch by a woman called Catherine Magson, who had a degree in music. In other words, there's the lobotomy in action. And what we have to do, frankly, is keep Manx care, get rid of this bean counting culture up there. I mean, I'm bumping into nurses and doctors most weeks, and they're saying to me,
it's your age, I guess.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. That's my excuse all the way around. But saying, look, we're trying to do our best, but we're sort of constantly harangued, if you like, by, we've got to follow a paper procedure or whatever. We have to keep Manx care, remove the bean counter culture, and then do the hard thing, which is go and find that very rare creature, which is a consultant or a clinician who will carry the medical profession behind him or her, but who also understands how to run a health business. And that's where we start to win. Don't get the idea that, we return it back to the politicians, because you and I were in Tynwald watching poor David Anderson go through hell and back again when we were supposed to be running the health service. And as far as Laurie Hooper's point about introducing inheritance tax and perhaps capital gains, if he wants to destroy the Isle of Man, let it, go for that route. What I would say is there's an obligation on the part of those of us a little bit better off to, in some way or other, contribute something more, much more on the purchase side than the taxation side. But I don't believe there's an appetite for that until such time as Tynwald and government gets its act together and lives within its means. Once it does that, then I think people will come up in behind government and say, okay, what can we contribute? Right now, there's no appetite for it at all, for the reason I've tried to explain.
I was speaking, Andy, to a civil servant who will remain nameless, who was lamenting the fact that there were certain things that needed to be done in their department which were obvious, and they were things that should be funded by the department. But instead of being funded by the department because the department didn't have the money to do it, they were having to fill in a variety of different claim forms to try and get a grant from one of the many agencies of government to get things done. That's not how it would work in your business, I guess.
No, and that's where the issue is, and it's just not a situation that's workable. Where's the money? Where is the money that's going into these departments going to? Then, and we've seen major things in my industry and so on, and cancellations and so on, and those funds have all been set aside. Those enterprise has been funded in the past. Now, where's that money gone if it's not within those departments? So why are those departments going out looking for money from grants and from Department of Enterprise, I would assume?
Alistair, the example I gave, I guess you would find in many parts of government now, and yet that there are no end of people employed to account for every penny and where every penny is being spent. Is part of the problem maybe that we're so busy doing internal scrutiny and management that we don't have the funds just to do the day job, or is that too simplistic an argument?
Maybe. I mean, the other thing that's surprising is that given what's happening in the rest of the world, we're not really having the debate yet about the modernisation of our government systems that Chris was talking about, in fairness to him, quite a long time ago, with AI and so on. I mean, that could transform government. As far as I know, they have a kind of AI person in government looking at business opportunities, but you would expect somebody to be looking at the implications of all this technology for the whole of the government workforce.
I think the Chief Minister has grappled or grasped that particular nettle and has been suggesting that this is one of the ways in which government can become more efficient.
The cynic in me, though, Phil, would say it's the final years of the administration, and that's very standard in the final years of the administration for these sorts of policies to come out and for headcount to be reduced. So there can be said so at the election. Well, we've done this now.
Well, I was talking to somebody the other day when Mr. Kane was the AG, and I was reminded that his staffing at that time was something in the region of 10 to a dozen people. It's now 75.
Cabinet Office?
No, AG's department.
No, but Cabinet Office is similar, isn't it?
Here's another one. Treasury closed down the My Card, something I brought in, which I still believe in, protects those most vulnerable, and is being thrown out, in my view, without a full explanation as to how everybody's going to be protected.
One of the closest votes that government has come to actually being defeated as well. It was, I think, 11-10 in the Keys when the order was considered.
About what, My Card?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they haven't properly explained, just as all the banks are closing, exactly how those who need that sort of support are going to be helped. We've missed all sorts of opportunities to reinvent key post offices around the country. However, I'm trying to say sort of far too much too quickly, so I'll back off a bit.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because we all, I wouldn't have invited any of you here if I didn't think you would have opinions, because that's what the programme's all about. I guess that if anything, if government should be judged on its major plan, the Our Ireland plan, and delivery of that plan. Now, of course, the plan was drafted in such a way that many of the objectives and the aims would be delivered after the next general election. But presumably there has to be some level of accountability for how far have you actually got, how much has been achieved by this. Alistair, do you think that, would you give any mark out of 10 for government in relation to actually achieving what they set out to achieve?
Oh gosh,
I'm putting you on the spot.
I would struggle with that. Maybe 4. I mean, I think what they would say is that they have put the foundations in place for this bright new future. They're investing in the future. The economy will take off and so on. We've got this framework for 100,000 people. But I don't think the public are convinced. And in the meantime, the perception of an overspending government makes it very hard to get the public on board with anything.
I was amused, I have to say, by the story this week on Manx Radio about inflation. And inflation, I think it had gone up slightly. But they pointed out that housing rental had gone up by 20%, but sticking plasters had gone down quite a lot. And without any sense of irony in that press release, I was thinking, yes, there seemed to be lots of sticking plasters, but not so much addressing the housing crisis. That was what most of the members were concerned about at the last election, and yet, I don't know. You have had former responsibility for housing, Chris. How many marks out of 10 would you give the progress on housing?
I don't want to particularly judge individuals. I would argue, with regard to the performance, I would argue that the position I've taken for years and years now is that government needs reform. And it's only when it gets through. I mean, gosh, I was using the word reform before there was a Reform Party in the UK, for goodness sake. My last manifesto was the Little Green Book of Government Reform. That's how passionately I believe we need serious change. And I think what we're seeing now is we're starting to see the current situation begin to crack. Seriously crack. These tensions, these presentations by the Treasury Minister, the discussions in Tynwald, these are all due in the final analysis to the fact that we're not living within our means. Our structure of government is now outdated. We need to update it and improve it and get to a position where we can reinstall or reintroduce confidence on the part of the people. But coming to your specific point about housing, how on earth can young people or lower middle income people have a chance of either buying a house or paying for rental, if you like, in the private sector, when our government is so determined to tax them so highly through the back door of the NI fund? It really won't do, Phil. It seriously won't do.
Andy, are you prepared to give a mark out of 10 for progress made? Bearing in mind, government will point to things like, we're having to kind of regroup after COVID. We've had the hits on in terms of inflation due to the war in Ukraine. Do you give them any?
Well, my point of view, Phil, would be an island plan. What we had is an overview of where they wanted to get to. What we didn't have is a plan. If I was a businessman walking in with a plan that needed funding, all I'd have is the first paragraph of my plan. We haven't had anything afterwards that's how we're going to get and really achieve those the objectives we're heading for. And that's where I think it's always gone wrong, or certainly in the last couple of administrations, when I've become more involved in watching the Manx political situation, that it's not a plan. It's just an objective, blue sky thinking kind of paper.
How many people in Tynwald, Phil, are ex-business people who've come in to politics sort of with all the cuts and bruises of life's experience, learned how not to do things as well as how to do things? The answer is, well, hardly anybody now.
What do you hope from this year's budget? What would you hope to see delivered by the Treasury Minister next week?
I would like to see, but I don't expect, a recognition by the Treasury Minister of the kind of public concerns that have been highlighted today about the overall financial position. And I'd also like to see him announce a proper national conversation on the future funding of health and social care, and do it properly this time, proper consultation.
Andy?
I'm going to go straight down with, I want to see our lower paid people giving more money in their pockets, because that's the money which will circulate within the Manx economy. I want to see higher tax allowances. I want to see higher thresholds on national insurance, as Chris has been pointing out. And I want to see a real discussion about how we really lift people out of poverty on the Isle of Man.
And of course, the way to get Chris Robert Shaw to explode is to limit him to 30 seconds.
Yeah, well, I don't expect much. I don't think for 1 second that we're going to see the lower income and lower middle income people position improved. I guess looking at, this is a real guess now, looking at what the the Treasury Minister has said that they're leaning further into the NI fund to pay for health, and he must be embarrassed about this additional 2%. I guess it'll be put and take. I think he'll probably take more money out of NI fund, damaging future pensions, in order to have some sort of upfront adjustment on tax in some way, as the lead point. What a good boy am I in what I've done. So I'm somewhat cynical, Phil, you may have noticed.
That was former MHK Chris Robertshaw, Andy Saunders from the hospitality sector, and political commentator Alistair Ramsey. So what do you think? Is it too late for government to deliver the difficult reform that our guests see as vital? Will there be a raid on the National Insurance Fund? Will Tynwald rebel over the vote to change the triple lock pension promise? I'm Phil Gaughan. Good night and geistach rom. Thanks for listening.